Oi, oi, it's your boy, the Alexa Grasso of Given That co-main event that passed, though. Jack Slack, it's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you following UFC 315 Mixed Bag. Normally, these Canadian events are subtitled Get Bent Canada because the UFC hate Canadians and going to Canada, which makes you wonder why they keep booking stadiums there. But Valentina Shevchenko co-main event, Belal Muhammad main event, ooh, that's already playing with fire in terms of snoozers. But then you got another women's flyweight fight on the main card. The portion we're supposed to be paying $80 for. But do you know what? This was like the ultimate extremes of Jack Slack card. We had the tedious ass Valentina Shevchenko co-main event where she won 3 rounds to 2. Then Daniel Cormier got on the mic and said, "Oh, another defense. You keep defending. You're unbeatable. Blah blah blah." Forgetting that she just got the belt back after like 2 years because it took her 3 goes to beat Alexa Grasso. But then, in the main event, Jack Della Maddalena fought like a man who'd been trained on Jack Slack Fightland era articles. He just did everything I love, nothing I don't like, and put on the performance of his life. I think some people really doubted that he was at the level to win this belt. I think the way that this works in combat sports generally is that if you win the belt, suddenly you're unbeatable. Or you can only win the belt if you're the absolute best in the world or whatever. I think the way it really works, obviously, is that there's all kinds of different matchups. And sometimes, for the champion, a guy who's like 20th in the world might just be trickier than a guy who's in the top 10. But Jack Della Maddalena came in, and I was sceptical of his chances because I'd watched Gilbert Burns stick to him for 2 rounds, and then JDM finished him, but I think we all felt like, oh, Gilbert Burns is getting long in the tooth. But he looked sensational here. Now, Jack Della Maddalena, my first experience watching him was that he was on one of the Dana White Contender Series cards when I was trying to cover that. And I tuned in and I went, God damn, this kid's incredible. And I got on Twitter and I said, if you didn't see Jack Della Maddalena on the Contender Series last night, you should check him out. He's something special. And I expected more of that going forwards. And it turns out Dana White's Contender Series is just 99% dog shit. So I gave up on that project. But Jack Della Maddalena stuck with me. And then I heard from someone that he was a reader of my old articles on Fightland and a listener to the podcast. There's lots of fighters from multiple disciplines on the Patreon, but I'm not going to, air their dirty laundry. Unless they do it themselves, like Sadiq Yusuf, who very kindly plugs me. But that sounded sus. Plugs my work. But I have heard that JDM has slacky influence on him, and I was very pleasantly surprised by him doing tons of stuff in this fight that I just love. I mean, I've been watching him for a while in the UFC and enjoying every single one, but I felt like I was going to write something about him, and then this fight came out of nowhere very quickly, because I think it was supposed to be Shavkat was fighting for the title. He got significantly injured, which is why people are still not talking about him fighting JDM for the title. What did he do? Did he get ACL himself or his back injury or something? But anyway, JDM stepped in fairly short notice, and I didn't have time to do anything about him, and now I'm like, I really should have. This fight was gorgeous, mate. I've got a list of things here. I never write notes for the podcast. I just go from the top of my head. But I've got a list of things here I want to talk about from this fight because it was awesome. Starting with the jab and dip or the cross and dip, both of them, same principle. I saw this in the fight, and then you never know when you watch a fight the first time how much is just your impression of it. I saw some guy on MMA Decisions gave Belal 4 rounds. You might have been caught up in the moment, but we all are guilty of it. So if you see something cool in a fight, you can trick yourself into thinking that they were doing it constantly and then go back and go, oh, he actually only did it twice. But I went through and looked for the jab and dip the second time I watched this, cut out all the clips of it, and I got more than 5 minutes of footage from a 25-minute fight just of the jab and dip, which is crazy. And I'm extending that to the cross and dip because it's the same principle, but the jab and dip is something I talk about a lot on this podcast, and I think we should be talking about it all the time. You're probably getting bored of it if you heard me talk about it before, but when you jab, and instead of trying to get out of dodge, you dip down slightly. And it can be extended to slipping left, slipping right, whatever. Jab and move would be or jab and move your head would be the gist of it. Think of someone working on the double end bag, but very few people actually apply that in any meaningful way in MMA. The jab and dip is like the serve and volley in tennis, which is you barely ever see anymore. At least you didn't when I stopped watching tennis. Everyone stands at the baseline now, just whacking balls and running side to side. But the jab and dip, you flick your jab out, it's a nice long jab. We were talking about standing right on top of the opponent and jabbing last week with Belal versus Leon Edwards, and we're going to talk about it later with Ayman Zahabi versus Jose Aldo. But in the jab and dip, we're talking about jabbing and moving your feet. You're doing a nice long jab, a fencer's thrust of a jab. You're stepping in, and you want it to go just, ideally, you're flicking them right on the end of it. And as soon as your jab's coming back, your head has already moved. So it's jab and dip. Because as soon as you flick your jab in someone's face and you tell them that you're coming close enough to throw punches, they're going to throw punches back. This is all going to be automatic. So you move your head in anticipation of them punching back, and then you're standing in front of them, they've missed a punch, and you can come back with a counter. And that's the whole purpose of the jab and dip. You jab to get on the counter. You go first and third, as Dominic Cruz is always saying, but it's the challenge you're always faced with in combat sports is, yeah, I can hit really hard on a heavy bag, but this guy's doing things like using his arms to stop me hitting him in the head. How do I open him up? How do I wedge myself in there? So the jab and dip gets you in a way that it puts you in danger in that you're encouraging the opponent to throw back at you. But you're doing something where it makes it quite difficult for them to actually read where you're going and hit you. Especially if you're not just going straight down every time. If you're moving left and right, if you change up slightly the look you're giving on the dip, makes it very tricky for the opponent. But all of that happens in a split second, and the ideal part is where the opponent's thrown back with their jab or something, they've missed, and you're standing almost on top of them with your right hand cocked and ready to throw. And Jack Della Maddalena did a ton of that in this fight. The great thing about the jab and dip is that it also, if you're in the habit of just jabbing and moving your head, jabbing and changing levels, it doesn't really matter if the opponent doesn't throw back at you, if they're not opening themselves up. The very first really good connection of this fight is a jab, dip, right straight, which is a very awkward little combination, which I have loved since I saw Aaron Pryor doing it back in the day. Aaron Pryor was, I think he was on the same Olympic team as Sugar Ray Leonard and Howard Davis Jr. and all the superstars on that team. And he was the alternate. He lost in the trials to Howard Davis Jr. and a lot of people felt like he shouldn't have, but he was the alternate. He didn't actually get to compete in the Olympics, but he was enormously talented. And he had this bizarre style. He was short for his weight class. He was stocky, but he would jab, dip, right straight, or right straight, dip, jab. He was always throwing these long straight punches with his feet almost level a lot of the time, ducking, leaping across the ring, taking little side steps on the inside. His hands were very rarely in position to protect his chin. He did all of it by moving his head, and almost all of it by moving his head preemptively, not waiting and trying to react to punches, but just, I've thrown a punch, now my head moves, and then I throw another punch and my head moves. This is not unheard of in boxing. You know, Cus D'Amato's whole peekaboo style was that you throw 3 punches and then you move your head 3 times. Not you throw 3 punches and then you look at what they're throwing back and you try and do the appropriate thing. But Pryor against Alexis Arguello, which is probably his most famous 2 fights and probably his best win, he repeatedly does this jab, dip into like a really low stance, and then he comes up with a long right straight and hits Arguello on the end of it. And JDM did that a couple of times here. That was the first good punch he landed in the first round. And Arguello versus Pryor is probably a great fight for both the offensive and defensive end or counter-offensive end of good head movement, good jab and dip, good preemptive head movement or anticipatory head movement, because Alexis Arguello's thing was that he was very good at punching people as they moved their head. He was very good at reading where people were going to and catching them with weird lead hand uppercuts and things out of position. So this JDM versus Belal fight, he does it 100 times. He switches stances lots, so a lot of the time he's going from southpaw and he throws his left straight, so his rear hand is cross, and then he dips. And then he steps through and throws an orthodox left hook over the top or something like that. But there was a lot of jab and dip and left straight and dip. And if you look at how he was throwing his, when he was orthodox, right hand leads, when he was southpaw, left hand leads. So if you look at how he's throwing his straight with his back hand, he'd stand almost square and he'd poke it. It wasn't a big punch. It was just a stabby little punch. And that's something that Roy Jones used to do when he was throwing his right hand leads. Muhammad Ali used to do it. He'd fake a jab cross and then stand with his shoulders square, pause a beat, and then throw just his hand from that position, right straight. But it acts in the same way as a jab. It initiates the exchange. So he's throwing the left straight as a poke, and then he's either ducking down and trying to counter, or a lot of the time he'd drop away and he'd throw the left hand properly over the top of Belal's right. the open side counter, the one that Conor McGregor made famous. I mean, that was like the meat and potatoes of Conor McGregor's game. He had this open side counter, and then the rest of his game was, how do I get you to throw your right hand at me? So jab and dip, cross and dip, that was gorgeous. The dude was throwing darts out there, which I always love, which is where you throw your rear hand as you step down the outside of the opponent, and then you slide past them. You just sort of float past them. Anytime I see a dart, I love that. What else have I got written down here? The inside low kick, high kick, double attack, which reeks of Volkanovski, but also of City Kickboxing and Israel Adesanya. Using the inside low kick with the lead leg, which is not a particularly hurting kick. It's a balance-breaking kick. If you can kick someone on the inside of the lead leg and lift their foot off the floor or knock it out of place, you can follow up with a good right hand or a jab. But because he's got this preliminary step, which we talked about in Advanced Striking 2.0, Alexander Volkanovski, on the Fight Primer, which you can go and read for free, Google it. Because there's that preliminary step where you bring your right foot up underneath you so that you can kick with your lead foot, you can use that step to get the guy moving before he should. So if you kick the inside lead leg a load, and then you step up and you throw a high kick instead, good chance of braining him. And I think that's probably something JDM and his team picked up from the Leon Edwards fight, the first one, because there were slow-mo clips between the rounds in this fight that look exactly the same, where the kick's coming up and Belal reaches for it and then realizes it's coming up to his head. Happened 2 or 3 times in that one-round fight against Leon Edwards the first time. Got in with it a couple of times here. I will say that Belal, while he was on the losing end of most of this fight, I think I gave JDM 4 rounds to 1. I've seen a lot of people give him 3 rounds to 1. The first round was close and competitive, so it depends how you score that. But I don't want to act like Belal was doing nothing here, because there were some points where JDM did the jab and dip, and then Belal tried to kick him in the head where his head was moving to. So it's throwing a left kick out to the left of your left hip. Really weird place to throw a kick to. So when you see him do it, you're like, oh, he clocked that. And then JDM throws a big right hand to get him off that line of thinking, and then immediately goes back to the jab and dip, because that's what you've got to do. If someone shows you something to stop you doing something, if that's their goal, you've got to go back to it and say, no, I'm not going to stop doing it just because you showed me that you might hit me with a head kick or an uppercut or whatever. There were also a really good amount of front kicks to the body, which I think is still something that we don't notice enough because the commentators don't talk about it. A front kick to the body, and most fighters will tell you this, much worse than getting jabbed in the face for the most part, because they stay with you. They add up over the rounds. They really slow you down. I always say on this podcast that Tony Ferguson used to land about 40 front kicks to the body in the course of a 5-round fight, and I don't think the commentators mentioned one of them. And then they'd always be going on about how, like, he just runs them ragged with his pace. He just gets them tired by doing lots of movement. Well, he also kicks them in the body a lot. That also helps. Loved all the shoulder rolls. I think with the shoulder rolls and the jab and dip, it's all the same idea. In MMA, how do you get comfortable standing in front of the opponent? Because everyone in MMA is striking in a way where they run in and then they run out. That's the defense. That's the preemptive defense. You throw your punches and then you've got to get out there quick because they're going to be throwing punches back. And the extremes of that are when you see things like young Carlos Diego Ferreira versus young Dustin Poirier, where they both just take it in turns running on a line at each other and then running backwards. And it's an awful fight striking-wise. And Dustin Poirier is the perfect example because he fought half his career in that crap run-in, run-out way and was blessed with heavy hands so he could hurt people, but the moment he started standing in front of people and trying to shoulder roll, everyone went, oh, shoulder roll will never work in MMA. You're not a good enough boxer, blah, blah, blah. It's like, how are you going to be a good enough boxer if you don't practice it? So by finding the shoulder roll and being in the gym, working the shoulder roll in sparring, getting down behind his shoulder, standing in front of people and letting them punch at him, he got comfortable standing in range. And now he's one of the best counter punchers in MMA because he can stand right in front of you comfortably. And the notion that the shoulder roll doesn't work in MMA is silly anyway, because people think that you need the big gloves to bounce off your shoulders. No, the big gloves work best for when you're doing like the high hands guard that everyone still does in MMA, even though they don't have big pillows on their hands to protect them. The stuff that works in MMA is putting yourself down behind bones. Behind your shoulder, behind your elbow, behind your forearm. That's the stuff that you saw JDM doing in this fight. Watch Dustin Poirier when he shoulder rolls. He leaves his body quite open. He picks his lead elbow up and points it at the opponent. He gets his shoulder up by his chin, and instead of having his glove up by his jaw on the backside, he puts his hand on top of his head a lot of the time and uses the full like bone of his wrist to protect his jawline. And I wrote an article on that too, Advanced Striking 2.0 Dustin Poirier, which is, again, I think available free for everyone. Go and Google it. So it was great to see Jack using the shoulder roll, but he also uses the high forearms guard. You can do both. You could do either. And the high forearms guard is really interesting because the danger with that is that you've got your forearms high, so your body's exposed and your hips are exposed and your legs are exposed to people level changing on them. And he has a move that is very unusual. I've seen Justin Gaethje do it, but that's about it. Head blocks in MMA. Head blocks in wrestling, quite common because you're bent over at the waist anyway. You just put your head down in front of theirs as they try and shoot on you. But JDM's doing it from an upright position with his hands high. So instead of dropping his hands to try and dig underhooks or something like, which is the old school method that's still around today in MMA, he bends at the waist and drops his head in front of the opponent's head. It was crazy to see that work on high-level fighters like Belal, and I think he did it to Gilbert Burns as well. And on the theme of putting bones in front of your target areas being the best way to defend yourself, Belal was landing best when Jack Della Maddalena went southpaw, because Belal could throw his long overhand right behind Jack's left hand and wrist. You know, attacking the open side is something we're always on about. We were on about it before Islam versus Volkanovski 2, and then when Islam comes out and just throws kicks on the open side constantly, because if only their hand and wrist are there to protect them, it's a lot easier to slip things through. And in truth, it's a lot easier to just hurt their arm. Yodsanklai, who's one of the greats of Thai boxing, he was a southpaw, and he had this amazing left kick. And the question is like, yeah, you got an amazing left kick, but everyone keeps their guard really tight at the high levels of Muay Thai. And he went, okay, I'll just kick him in the arm then. And he had multiple opponents where he fractured their forearm and they had to quit. TKO, broken arm. But when JDM went southpaw, obviously on his left side, only his hands defending him. So it was very easy for Belal to slip the right overhand behind his hand. It's very hard to shoulder roll on your rear side, because you have to turn your body all the way around to do it. So you can do it when you throw that hand. You can get down behind that shoulder, which is a great way to get away with throwing like a powerful rear hand and not getting back on your stance. And a great way to counter that open side counter, actually. But when you're just in a defensive position, it's very hard. And of course, when you're fighting southpaw versus orthodox too, Belal was having good success with the slap the leg with the lead hand and throw the overhand. It's the oldest trick in the book in MMA. Slap the leg, throw the overhand, and then drop on the takedown attempt, ideally. But Merab's still doing it. If you watch Merab versus Umar, he must have done it about 100 times whenever Umar went southpaw. One of the interesting things about this fight is that people are complaining that Belal didn't get to the takedowns. When he did, I think the problem is not really understanding what Belal's game is. Belal's game is not push you to the fence and grind on you. Belal's best work is done in the mixing of the striking into the shot against the fence, getting the hands together and hitting the double leg. He's not really that great a grindy fence wrestler. His great strength is the up and down combinations near the fence, shooting into the fence and getting his hands locked between you and the fence, which is a timing thing. You know, you can't just do that once they're already pressed against the fence. You know, half the thing about the cage fight now is that guys use it to prevent the opponent locking their hands. If your body's squished against the fence and they can't lock their hands around you, they don't get that same control. So to be like Belal was trying to show his Canelo hands or whatever is to miss the point that the combination of striking into wrestling and cage position is what makes Belal good. So it's having a rounded game, but it also means that if you take away any one of those elements, if Jack Della Maddalena was out in the middle of the cage, if the striking was not effectively setting it up, that all hampered his ability to hit his takedowns in the way that people are familiar with him hitting his takedowns. But the actual wrestling on the fence, I was quite enjoying it. Jack Della Maddalena, if you saw, he was just trying to keep his elbows to his body all the time, just prevent Belal from locking his hands around him. When Belal dropped on the legs, he went to the arm drag grip, threatened the ninja choke occasionally. The Craig Jones type stuff from his Balls to the Wall series, but you want to give Craig Jones credit here, but I also want to point out that Jack Della Maddalena has always been a really surprisingly good grappler. One of the reasons that I was so impressed with him on the Contender Series, I think it was Angalusi he was fighting, but he didn't have it all his way on the feet. He got taken down a couple of times, and he used a really nice scrambly sort of make movement happen style on the bottom. He was turning to the turtle, getting up, sitting out, threatening to hit the switch. It was dynamic. and unusual. Though I'm sure he benefited from having Craig Jones in his camp, and I'm not going to take anything away from Australia's second greatest grappling coach after Lachlan Giles. But basically every time that this fight became a grappling fight or a wrestling fight, you got to see Della Maddalena do some interesting things. The very first time Belal did get in on his legs along the cage, and Della Maddalena threatened the switch, which is where you reach inside their thigh, use the back of your arm on the back of their arm to create some pressure, and you can go around to their back if they don't address it. But he threw the switch in, seeming to not expect to get the switch, and Belal let go, and JDM dropped to his knees, brought his elbows in, and then stood up again so that he was back in position with his elbows on the inside, and nothing for Belal to grab, which was really interesting. It was almost like I'm going to do this, and then Belal reacted, and he was like, but I'm not really. I really liked are they Haragoshis? With judo terminology, you never know. Or at least I never know. If you go to the judo subreddit, it's just dudes arguing about what the name of the throw should be. It's like, saw this cool throw at a competition, what would you call it? And someone will be like, oh, that's a Sasai Surakomiashi. And then someone will reply, you idiot. It's up by the knee. It's a Hizaguruma. First person will come back. Actually, it's slightly below the knee. Second person will come back, but it's nearer the knee than it is the foot. Judo boys love arguing about Japanese terminology. John Danaher is a judo boy at heart. But Jack Della Maddalena was attempting these throws where he didn't have an overhook, like Islam Makhachev often has along the fence, when his back's to the fence. He just had like an over-the-shoulder grip or a arm drag grip, and he'd put his leg out and try and throw Belal over it. It was the least convincing throw you've ever seen. Like, he wasn't hoofing Belal over, but Belal would have to take a step and let go. And then JDM would get back to his sort of elbows in, fight him off, circle off the cage position, and he was laughing. And it's literally the thing we talk about all the time. I've been talking about it for 5 years at this point. If you look at Islam Makhachev, the guy who's been training with Khabib his entire life, when he gets smushed to the fence, he's not just trying to pummel his way out or turning his back and separating the hands, which is the standard. He's taking the overhook and he's attempting a throw. And he doesn't always get the throw. A lot of the time he doesn't get the throw. But if you make a convincing attempt at the throw, the guy has to either let go or belly out or do something that allows you to come off the fence. So I don't believe Jack Della Maddalena has any sambo or judo background, but it didn't prevent him from attempting throws in a way that made Belal let go of him. And he did the same to Gilbert Burns. I think Gilbert Burns held on to him and he threw him over the top and they had like a scramble off it. But it's, for the love of God, make something happen, make movement happen, get off the fence. There's a great phrase that Pedro Sauer used to use when talking about like escaping side control on the bottom, but he said, you've got to break the inertia. That's more important than doing your perfect escape. You've got to stop this guy from just holding you. And maybe that involves going into a slightly worse position momentarily so that you're moving. And in the fifth round, Belal got him down. Fifth round, giggler sweep. Obviously, your boy was sitting here going crazy. It's just, if you've not seen anything about the giggler sweep before, or the knee lever, or the John Wayne, go to my YouTube channel, look up Mansour Barnoui versus Father's Plan. Mansour Barnoui just got a whole PFL event cancelled in Paris by being investigated for domestic abuse. So, bit of a shitlord. But he does have one really cool sweep, and it worked against Islam Makhachev, and it worked against other members of Eagle Team, and it's crazy how often he's able to hit it effectively. Now, Mansour Barnoui uses it as a sweep. He has these giant hands, he grabs your wrist, and then he sweeps you over by you not being able to post. But the giggler sweep itself, or the knee lever, is an off balance. So what most people do, and you're seeing it all the time in high-level fights and not really clocking it, because it's a small thing, is that they off-balance their opponent from half guard, the opponent bases out or whatever, and then they scramble up. Leon Edwards did it to get a butterfly hook in against Kamaru Usman. Pantoja did it to wrestle up against Ursig. I think Ursig did it to Pantoja as well. But JDM did it here to off-balance Belal, shoved him away with both hands in the armpit, and just scrambled up, which must have been incredibly frustrating for Belal because it was the first time he'd really got him down and flat in 5 rounds. And then he got him down again later in the 5th, and JDM, from a position that was like crossed over half guard, he was completely, it looked like a really bad position to be in. He threatened the Kimura. As Belal pulled back from that Kimura, he rolled underneath himself. He went upside down, inverted, to threaten an attack on the leg. And then as Belal sat back on that leg, JDM just popped his head out, so he was in the turtle facing away from Belal, and he stood up. which is something you don't see enough. Guys using, because the inversion is such like a, I play guard, I'm a Gumby guy, I'm going to do cool leg locks. But if you pop your head out and just complete the back roll into the opponent when they sit back, you're literally in that stand-up wrestling position, the referee's position. You just get to your feet. You don't see guys combine it enough, and it was really cool to see JDM do it here. And that was a little bit of, I don't know if that was Craig Jones's influence, but that is something Craig Jones used to do a lot. He would attack a Kimura on the upper body, and when the guy ripped his arm out, Craig would get in on the leg. Because Craig's whole thing was going for legs, so no one's going to give it to you as the on your first attack. If you watch his match with Chael Sonnen at ADCC, perfect example of that. So all of that is to say, 4-1 Jack Della Maddalena, fantastic performance, fantastic fight. All kinds of questions about him, because I think he hasn't been like Shavkat, where coming up, Shavkat met no resistance until he finally met Ian Gary, and then we went, oh, okay, well, he's had a little bit of resistance now. JDM had some fights where he had to work a bit harder, like the Basil Hafez fight was not his finest hour. He won pretty convincingly, but he was doing some really bad decision-making, grabbing these guillotines because he felt like he could finish them. And it was ultimately like a momentary, I can win this fight here, cost him positionally. And then obviously Gilbert Burns gave him some trouble in the early going. People used to talk about the Kevin Holland split decision, but that was I thought that was pretty convincing, to be honest. But I can't score the split. I saw people talking about, what was the fight on this card? People were talking about, I can't believe that was a unanimous. Oh, it was the Jose Aldo one, but it's like, I agree that the wrong person won, but you can't score it a split on your own. I suppose you can be like, I can't believe 3 people agreed on that, but, it's Canada. So let's talk about that fight next, because that was the other good one on this card. Jose Aldo, last fight, has now retired again. I'm not going to do a whole spiel about that because I've done it several times before at this point. But it was crazy. Like, this guy has been fighting since, is it 2003? Is 2025 now? And Ayman Zahabi is a decently ranked prospect. Last year, he beat Jonathan Martinez, a decently ranked prospect. Guys like Mario Batista and Merab Dvalishvili have to fight in a really boring, safe way that wins them no fans to get past Aldo, even at age 39 or whatever he is. And it's not just age 39, it's the fact that he has had 20 years of fighting. I think people don't realise that that's... Whenever you say someone's old in fighting, people go, he's only 35. And you say, yeah, but he's been fighting since he was like 17 years old. Used to have this with Shogun and Big Nog. Big Nog came to the UFC, he was absolutely washed. And you go, oh God, he's so old and shop-worn. And people would go, he's 32. And you'd go, wow, okay, that is actually really young because he looks awful. And he's been fighting for 15 years. But Ayman Zahabi's on a good little run. He had a bad start in the UFC and then he disappeared for, I think it was about 4 years. So I've seen people joking about this, but like, he's the young prospect in this fight. He's already 37. This is one of the divisions where no one has won in a title fight over the age of 35, except just now Alexander Volkanovski. And that was kind of because the title was a vacant one. It wasn't beating Ilia Topuria. It was also because Diego Lopez can't cut the fucking ring, which we're going to talk about later with his teammate. But this was an interesting fight because Jose Aldo, even with 20 years on the clock, he's so fast. He pressured Ayman Zahabi back from the start, and as soon as Ayman Zahabi tried to push him back with like a 1-2, Aldo was slipping the 1 and coming back with a left hook before the 2 landed, or before Zahabi threw the 2, which was giving him real trouble. End of the first round, Zahabi actually gets to work doing what they must have been planning to do. Firas Zahabi kept shouting, punch him from arm's length, which we talked about last week with Leon Edwards versus Belal 2. The difference between the first fight and the second fight, Belal stood on top of him. Everyone thinks that the jab is in, like, you spring forward with your jab, you connect on the end of it, and then you spring back. And that's not always the best way to fight. Against a guy who's going to slip and counter, you want to get up in his grill and make sure that when you do throw, you're too close for him to react in time. And every time you like wave your hands about at all, he's slipping as if you're going to punch him. So getting right up in Aldo's grill like that, opening up your hands and trying to check everything he's doing too, but throwing lots of feints from really up close, poking out jabs from almost on top of him, that was working really well for Zahabi. Because that's been the secret to beating Aldo, unless you've got Conor McGregor magic power and you spend a months-long media tour getting Aldo upset and then he runs at you in a way that he's never done at anyone else before. The way to beat Aldo is to fake him out get him slipping at things that aren't there, and he either stops slipping and trying to counter as much because he gets tired, because he doesn't want to get tired, or he gets tired because he's reacting on a hair trigger all the time and he moves at 100 miles an hour. If you watch the Max Holloway fights, Max has to get hit a few times, but the whole point of the early rounds is to get Aldo working as much as possible. And then Aldo starts clinching Max, and Max just keeps breaking free and going, nope, not gonna chill in the clinch, we're still working. And about halfway through round 2 or the start of round 3, Aldo's engine just starts to sputter. So Zahabi had good effect doing that, but it wasn't, it was nowhere near flawless. I did like the jab into step up left knee he was doing from time to time. I liked that he got to the body occasionally. Aldo obviously goes to the body like almost no one else. He really, when he goes to the body, he commits. He goes, right, having that, and he wallops you twice with the hardest punches, like he's working the heavy bag. And it's interesting because he's got these gas tank problems, and he always has had them. But by going to the body, he can try and sort of level out the energy consumption. If the other guy gets really tired from being hit in the body, maybe it'll keep Aldo in pace with him, cardio-wise. He hurt Zahabi in the third, and then he ran at him, and he hit him with a kick as Zahabi was standing up off the ground, and he did it twice, which is a really slick move. Going to give some rare praise to regional champion Gegard Mousasi here. Mousasi did that to Thiago Santos. He bundled him over somehow, and he stood over him, and he said, no, you get up. And because the ref, it's like the sneaker in boxing, because the ref hasn't said, break, stand up, if the other guy starts standing up, there's a moment where his hand's on the floor, and then his hand has to come up to his guard. And in that time, you can kick him in the head. Eric Anders did it to some dude as well. Unfortunately, in trying to finish Ayman Zahabi in the third, Jose Aldo spent everything. There is a hilarious still of the third round. They're 2 minutes in, and Aldo's looking at the clock. So he ended up pulling guard on Zahabi and just getting beaten up with elbows for the rest of the round. And obviously, Jose Aldo's tough as nails. He's just laying there going, oh, this is annoying, while he's getting his head split open. He came out afterwards. He had struggled to make weight, so they bumped this up to a catch weight the week ahead of the fight, which is very unusual because Jose Aldo has always looked like death on the scales, but in 20 years of fighting, he's never actually missed weight. And then in his statement after the fight, he said that halfway through the weight cut, he just had a crisis of confidence and was like, why am I doing this? Which, honestly, after 20 years, almost any fighter who's gone any length of time gets very bored of it eventually. One of the interesting things about Aldo was that he still had this amazing passion for boxing. He left the UFC and went to box and was training with this Brazilian boxing team and came back to the UFC and his boxing looked better than ever. I always say in that Martinez fight, he's moving with his punches, covering distance in a way that he never did before that in his prime. So it was quite interesting in that his physical prime was very much past him, but he was still learning things. But competition it's a skill, and it's a skill of its own. Being able to make the weight, being able to do all that grueling shit that isn't the fun part of fighting is more than half the job, to be honest. Jack Della Maddalena just won the world title having lost his first 2 fights. And people point at that and go, wow, isn't that an amazing turnaround? I've not seen those fights, but I think it's very unlikely that someone who is as good as Jack Della Maddalena now didn't have obvious talent to begin with. I suspect it was to do with the skill of competing. How you're weight cutting, how your nerves are, whether you have a big adrenaline dump after the first minute of the fight or whatever. These are all things that aren't fighting, but are a huge part of fighting. And so if Aldo says that he just doesn't want to do those bits anymore, I think that's, time to call it a day. Great shout. Decisions were looked at askance on this one. I think my boy Kai on Twitter had the best take on this, which is 37-year-old prospect and your best win is over a 90-year-old. Well done. Poor old Ayman Zahabi. There's not really a way that this comes out well for him. Aldo's still so much better than people will ever give him credit for looking at his age and when the fight happened. But, there was no way you were ever going to blow through him. So you have this hard-fought fight, you win a decision, everyone wants you to lose it because it's Aldo and he's the greatest. And then, because it's in Canada, you get all these accusations of favoritism, which is a real shame. It's like Mario Batista was on the run of his life and was looking really... literally, 3 weeks before he fought Aldo, someone said to me, aside from the obvious, like Charles Oliveira, who's a guaranteed action fighter that you always tune in for? And I said Mario Batista. Then, 3 weeks later, everyone fucking hates Batista for the way that he fought against Aldo. Jesus, I've just seen Haim Ghazali's trying to dunk on Belal Muhammad. If you've ever seen a Haim Ghazali, this guy basically had to retire from... This guy had the only fight in Bellator history that is widely suspected to have been a work. By others, not me. I'm not saying that. I will say go watch it. They've scrubbed most mentions of it from the internet. I'm saying it's not a work, but man, the level of those fighters is so bad that people thought that was a work. Anything else on this card? Natalia Silva versus Alexa Grasso. I quite like Natalia Silva. I don't think her depth of skill is that great. Basically, it's the feints and the kicks from long range, and then as soon as you step to her, she's going to try and swing that left hook like she's Steve from Tekken. Just no bones in her arm. Slap, slap, slap. However, Alexa Grasso fought like really bad in this fight. And this is 3 fighters out of Lobo Gym. I can't remember Lupe Godinez's last ring-cutting performance, but the 3 top fighters out of that gym, Alexa Grasso, Diego Lopez, Irene Aldana, have all lost multiple fights due to following the opponent around the ring. Which is crazy because they're a Mexican gym, they pride themselves on their boxing. All the greatest Mexican boxers are, mainly in-fighters, pressure fighters, high-pace fighters who can cut the bloody ring. It's half the art. And I see every countdown, there's clips of Alexa Grasso or Irene Aldana or Diego Lopez working the double end bag, doing the mitts, doing lots of cool slips. It's like, are you working on your footwork? Because if you don't corral the guy towards the cage, you're never going to get to hit him. I just can't believe that a team with such a glaring problem isn't working on that all the time. And if you're not familiar with the terminology, cutting off the ring, cutting off the cage, same thing. Yes, the cage is much more near circular than a boxing ring, but you can still cut it off. Go watch Chris Weidman versus Lyoto Machida, Rafael Dos Anjos versus Anthony Pettis, Ilia Topuria versus Alexander Volkanovski. Cutting the ring is about taking away space that the opponent can work in. If you go straight towards the guy, it's going to be like doing Space Invaders and trying to shoot at where they are instead of where they're going. You have to step across to cut off the ring, not cut off the man. So if they're in front of you and they're circling to your right, you don't step to where they are. You step to like 2 o'clock. And then they're going to change direction and you step to 10 o'clock, 9 o'clock, wherever. But you're taking off space behind you. You're not just trying to push them straight backwards into the cage. Reducing the amount of space in which they have to work. Go and watch any Julio Cesar Chavez fight, but particularly Julio Cesar Chavez versus Camacho. I was talking about this on the Boycast because I anticipated bad footwork coming into this one. Julio Cesar Chavez fights Camacho. Camacho is a fantastic ring general. Most people couldn't catch him against the ropes, in 100 rounds. Julio Cesar Chavez does it in 30 seconds, and then he does it again. And Camacho's having to sprint to get out the side. And that's it. If you're cutting the cage well and the guy has to sprint, he's going to get tired. If you're just following them around and they're just skipping sideways, they're never going to get tired. And then Alexa Grasso's only offense was a double jab, which I'm always saying double jab, but double jab to an end. Do something with it. Double jab, drop the right hand on them. Double jab and follow up and move into the cage. Dean Thomas was losing his mind when they asked him about it because she double jabs, lands the second jab, and then steps back and gives the center of the cage to Natalia Silva. And this links back to my constant theme on these podcasts, on these articles, on this stuff I've been doing for a decade or more. Where you are in the ring or cage has as much impact on what's happening as what techniques you're throwing, what you're good at, whatever. It's not what you do, it's where you do it. And that's influenced by your footwork and how you can read the opponent and move to cut them off. Or if you're circling the ring, how you can change directions and mix. And that's how you know that she wasn't doing a good job cutting the ring. Because if she was doing a good job cutting the ring, Natalia Silva would have to use direction changes to throw her off. And she didn't. Natalia Silva just circled out wherever she wanted. Terrible fight. I'm glad for Natalia Silva. Good for her. People like her. She'll probably lose in her title fight against Shevchenko by being head and arm thrown. Benoit Saint-Denis versus Karl Prepolek should have been a murder. It kind of was a murder, but everyone just saw this and went, damn, Benoit Saint-Denis looks really slow. He's still got that gift for violence. He's been doing this for like 5 years and he's just really savvy when he elbows, when he clinches. The The punches he selects, his strike selection, is all great. He just looked really slow. Mike Malott knocked out Charles Radke with a beautiful, step off line left hook. I liked all of Mike Malott's striking this one. To be honest, I quite liked Charles Radke. His ring cutting was much better than Alexa Grasso's. It wasn't amazing, but it was pretty good. Jasmine Jasudavicius choked out Jessica Andrade, who is, should just be retired. And the rest of the card was mid. I did like that when Bruno Silva he suffered a very bad knockout and was rushed to the emergency room. I did like that the UFC kept updating it throughout the broadcast until they were confident that Silva was recovering and on the mend. It's always a fine line in this sport because you'll notice when people get knocked out badly, they tend not to linger the camera on them. You get the odd clip like Bryce Mitchell seizing, but I'll tell you that happens a lot more than you'd think it does because the camera moves away to follow the winner. And I think that's the way it should be. You should be celebrating the winner, not focusing on the gruesome spectacle of the loser. But, I grew up with the Gerald McClellan thing, and there was one with Roy Jones. No, not Roy Jones. There was another famous one around that time. And that was all sort of everyone was celebrating. We were looking at Nigel Benn, and then you just got word that Gerald McClellan had collapsed while everyone was in the ring, and they'd rushed him to the hospital. And I think with Gerald McClellan, they couldn't get the ambulance into the stadium. They couldn't get the ambulance out of the stadium. There was a lot of stuff that went wrong and a lot of stuff that was legally had to change after that fight and that tragedy. But I'm just saying, I respect that they kept people... They didn't treat it like something they needed to brush under the rug, which can happen with stuff like that. So rare note of praise for the UFC to end today's podcast. I'll be back later in the week on the Boycast to chat about, Apex Slop again we're back on. Gilbert Burns versus Morales. Big welterweight prospect versus long-time welterweight banger who's sort of past it now. Some other weird stuff on that card too. Might do a film room or an article in the week just because there's not a lot going on this weekend. If you want to get in on all that, sign up to the Patreon, support the podcast, be a boy. I'm your boy Jack Slack, and I'll catch you next week. Jack Jab and Dip Elena bless.